What is going on, gunfighters? Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, EDC, preparedness, the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. On that, what are we going to talk about today? How about we talk about the winner of the Patreon poll? City boy versus country boy carry. What are the differences if you live in an urban versus a rural environment? That's the topic du jour, so saddle up. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review of the podcast. And if you want to vote in a Patreon poll or get a bunch of other cool insider-only content, check out Patreon. Alright, with that, let's define some terms. I'm talking about geographical area. I am talking about population density. I'm not talking about culturally. You could wear cowboy boots every day and drive a big jacked up pickup truck and have been to every Brooks and Dunn concert since the 90s. If you live in the middle of Atlanta, that's about as urban as you can get. A lot of people would consider themselves country boys in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, even though it's one of the most densely populated places in the country. I'm talking about geographically, not how you identify. You could live in the middle of nowhere on a ranch in Wyoming with more cattle and antelope than people in your county and listen to rap music and have a grill. Although I reckon that's a lot less likely than the earlier scenario. I'm talking about where you live, the environment you operate in, your AO if you want to spray a cool tactical acronym on it, your area of operation, not how you identify or what kind of music you like or what kind of car you drive. Let me give you an example of this. Vehicle maintenance. I think as a man you should know basic vehicle maintenance. However, if you live in a vast urban environment, if your goal is survival, if you break that down on the side of a freeway, it's probably better for everybody involved if you just call a tow truck and get it towed somewhere. If you live in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, it may be easier for you to just fix it on the side of the road yourself. That would be a good example of city versus country boy preparedness. Because the goal of preparedness is kind of to survive and thrive. And even if you can fix your vehicle on the side of the road, if you get hit and killed, which happens pretty regularly, that's not worth losing your life over fixing your own flat tire. Whereas in a rural environment, it's much less of a risk. Another example of this, if you are going to jack up your vehicle in a rural environment, like I live on a dirt road, I'd probably better have several pieces of wood to make a flat surface to jack up your vehicle and not have it fall on you and kill you. In an urban environment, you probably have flat pavement, or you can probably limp along till you get to somewhere flat and paved to jack up your vehicle. Those would just be some examples before we get into like the carry stuff. Let's talk about knives, right? What guy doesn't like talking about knives? Now, of course, these are vast generalities. But the Tonto. I like Tontos. I generally carry one in an urban environment when I'm operating as a private security contractor sometimes. I like a Tonto blade. I don't like it for my EDC, my everyday carry, because I live in a very, very rural environment. I do things like skin elk and skin deer and skin bear and make stuff and use my knife. A lot of urban boys are not doing that. Can you skin a elk with a Tonto blade? Sure, of course you can. If I don't have a knife, I could make one out of a piece of flint or a piece of obsidian, or I could take my used rifle case and smash it flat and grind the surface on a rock and make a handy enough blade to skin an animal if I have to. Of course it can be done, but a Tonto is more of an urban blade for piercing and stabbing and getting through material. If you live on a ranch in Wyoming, you were better off with a Tonto than no knife, but there's probably better options for you than a Tonto. I honestly think the term bushcraft has been kind of ridiculousized become ridiculous with like people in their backyards pretending they're in the wilderness and batoning wood and stuff like that. I spend a lot of time in the backcountry, guys. I've never once needed to baton wood. So I don't want to use the term bushcraft. Let me say knife woodscraft because it's been less ridiculous in the last, I don't know, 10 years. Wood's knife craft, right? There are really good knives designed for that. Maybe a Scandi grind, maybe a drop point. Good for doing stuff with wood, good for a lot of heavy tasks. We're going to be doing a lot of knife work. Not as good as fillet knife, but decent for cleaning a fish. Decent for, making snares, making notches, making steaks. Decent for roasting meat over a fire, making a spit, things like that. But you're probably not doing any of that if you live, unless you just go out on the weekends for fun. But if you live in Manhattan, you're probably not roasting an animal you killed over a spit on a fire that you made. You're just probably not doing that. So that's an example of different applications. If there was one best knife, then everybody would carry that knife. I'm going to tell you, in general, my favorite is a clip point blade. I like a clip point blade. Maybe it's the old school Marine in me and the old K-bar I used to carry, but a clip point blade I see as a pretty good compromise. It's pretty good at penetrating things. It's also really good and handy for like reaching up inside an animal with my finger on the tip of the blade and carving out, the internal organs. It's also a really good hunting and, woodscraft knife. It's also a pretty good everyday carry knife because, again, it is good at stabbing and things like that. So a clip point is a pretty good compromise. But we see an example here of one is more tailor-made for one environment than the other. Now let's talk about why a lot of you guys are here. The guns. It's gunfighter life after all. Now a lot of you guys said, just as a brief aside, a lot of you guys said, put the bio in the show notes and don't put it in the episode. But since then, the podcast has not been doing as well and Patreon has not been doing as well. So I may put it back in. Because you may listen, if you're a regular listener, and you may get tired of hearing it, but hopefully we get new listeners all the time. And I don't know why they would listen if they just think I'm some dude rambling on in a microphone. So I may put that back in. But anyway, I've done plenty of missions in the middle of nowhere, in wilderness, not including like my own hunting and fishing and survival excursions, like legit missions in the middle of nowhere, in forests, in deserts, far from people. I've done a lot more urban operations. I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. So a lot of this is mission dependent. I think every American male that's not a pacifist that feels called to be armed should probably have an AR-15. I'm not saying that's all they should have. I'm not saying it should be their one go-to survival gun. In fact, I don't think it should be for many people, including myself. But it wouldn't be a bad one. But I think every red-blooded American man ought to own, if he's not a pacifist, again, with all the caveats, he ought to own an AR-15. However, if you're just getting into guns, I would put that way higher on the list if you live in an urban environment. Well, let's look at why. The AR-15 was made for people. Get mad at that if you want. Call it a modern sporting rifle. It's an assault rifle. Come on, guys. Don't let Orwellian newspeak and the media make you afraid to use a term. It's an assault rifle. Sure, it's not full auto, but as somebody that shot a lot of full auto is mostly useless. Assault is not a bad word. Assault is an action. I was an assault man in the Marine Corps. My job was to assault things. If the person needs to be assaulted, right, then that's not a bad thing. If there's, a radical Muslim terrorist cutting people's heads off in a movie theater, I should probably assault that person. With speed, surprise, and violence of action, right? Locate, close with, and destroy the enemy by fire and maneuver. That rifle was meant for going toe-to-toe with other men. In an urban environment, there's a lot more men. If men start behaving badly, there's a lot more men behaving badly. Population density matters. I'm not saying there's not a place. Again, even if you live in the country, I think you should have an AR-15, but I think it should probably be higher on your list of go-to guns if you live in an urban environment. By urban, I mean a city of more than 1,000 people. I would consider 1,000 people pretty urban. I would consider more than 10,000 a big city. And you can argue with those numbers, but look at, before modern agriculture, look at the size of cities in the past, what we consider as big cities like London and Paris and things like that a couple of hundred years ago. So if you're in an urban environment, I think that AR-15 should be a lot higher on the list. It's what it was made for. Not specifically urban fighting, but fighting and fighting people. Your odds of fighting people are higher where there's a lot more people. You can argue with that, but that's just statistics. If one out of every 1,000 people is a really bad person that kills people, if you've got 10,000 people, that's more of them. If you have 1,000,000 people, that's a lot more of them. It's just, it's settled science. But seriously, I think it makes more sense for an urban firearm. Likewise, again, you can use it for different things. Can you hunt deer with an AR? Yes, I know that you can. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. There are way, 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 way better guns than an AR-15 and 223 for hunting deer. Can you do it again? Yeah, of course you can. You can do it. Again, I could butcher an animal with an old shell casing, with an old, rifle casing, but I'd rather have a good knife. It's not the right tool for the job. I can make it work. If you're in an area where you can actually hunt deer, or you have more large game in your area, you might want a weapon that's better suited for that. Even if we stick with an AR, now you could go either way. I like LPVOs, but if you're in an urban environment, probably a red dot because it's faster. And if you can't get good hits on even a reduced, smaller than man-sized target at, 300 meters with a red dot, that's a you problem. That's not that you need more magnification. And in most urban environments, you're not going to see farther than that unless you're on a rooftop, and you're probably not going to be on a rooftop. So a red dot makes a lot more sense there. If you're in a more rural environment, an LPVO might make more sense. You give up a little bit of speed, but if you have the skill, you might be gaining precision. And if you are in an environment where that trade-off makes sense, then make that trade-off. And there's no right answer there. Again, I've done many missions. I've done missions where I've rocked an LPVO, and I've done missions where I've rocked a red dot. They both have their place. But I would tend towards a red dot in a more urban environment, and I would tend towards an LPVO in a more rural environment, or wide open environment. And obviously there are different things for that. If you're a designated marksman, you probably want an optic, like a magnified optic. But before you go calling yourself a designated marksman, that's one member of a team when you have a bunch of other guys doing the other mainline things. You can't just be a designated marksman if you don't have a bunch of other guys and you are the designated marksman. So again, different roles, different setups, different things. Let's talk about handguns. This may ruffle some feathers. That's okay. One of the most overblown things in recent years on all over the gunosphere, right? The YouTube university, with all these influencers getting paid and taking kickbacks and all that stuff, is bear defense. Now, I live, unlike a lot of the people that are going to listen to this, I live in an area that has mountain lions and wolves and black bear and grizzly bear. In fact, I was on a spring bear hunt last week, and I hope to be on one again this week. I'm not going to commit to it. I hope that I have the time in my schedule for that. I routinely hunt bear. I spend a lot of time in the backcountry. I live off-grid in one of these rugged, wild, and remote places. I think your bear defense thing is overblown. I spend a lot of time in those environments. I've had 2, maybe 3 pretty hairy run-ins with bears over the years. Doing my line of work, I've had a lot more hairy run-ins with people that were trying to kill me. And I think that's true across the board. Everybody just loses their mind over bear defense. I don't care what state you live in. Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Alaska. Look at the amount of people killed there by bear every year. Then look at the amount of people killed by people there every year. It's not even close. It's not even close. I don't care how far you are in the backcountry, unless you're on a completely uninhabited island in a high brown bear population density area. Your biggest threat is probably still people. You're hiking on the Appalachian Trail, your biggest threat is not bears. Your biggest threat is people. People kill people on the Appalachian Trail all the time. Bears kill people on the Appalachian Trail almost never. People are more worried about it because it's just something you're not familiar with. But that doesn't make it a worse threat. Use logic and reason. I'm not saying don't defend yourself against bears. I'm saying don't miss the forest for the trees and be so concerned about bear defense you choose a crappy tool for fighting against people because you're worried about if it can penetrate a bear skull or not. If you're in an environment with both, get a gun that's good for both, but primarily your main threat is going to be people. Even if you're going in the middle of nowhere, to get there and get back, you're probably going to be around people. Gas stations, stop and robs, right? Convenience stores. People get violently assaulted and killed at those places all the time. A lot more than they get killed by bears or wolves or mountain lions. So just relax on that. I know that just made a bunch of people mad, but look at it. Look at the numbers. Go look up actual numbers. It's like being concerned about a great knife to defend off a shark in a shark attack, but you can't swim and you're going surfing. Probably worry about if you can swim or not before you worry about the shark biting you. You're probably way more likely to drown than you are get eaten by a shark, especially if you can't swim. I will say this because it's a reality. A lot of people will not change their life and where they live and their job and their career based on their human rights, based on their rights to, you know, the Second Amendment or gun freedom in their area. They will just stay and stay around their mom and stay around what they've known, and they'll live in the same place even if it's atrocious laws and they work at a job that hates guns. They'll just stay. I wish that wasn't the case, but it is. And that's probably a lot of you listening. And a lot of that is in an urban environment. I've told you guys on this podcast for a long time, I'm a big fan of carry a full-size fighting handgun. Handguns are bad for defense anyway. Get mad at me if you want, but look at the lethality rates of pretty much any handgun versus any decent rifle or shotgun. It's not even close. It's not even in the ballpark. People debate 9 versus 40 versus 45. There's fractional, marginal, academic differences in those. If you look at the number difference between any handgun and any rifle or shotgun, it's a dramatic difference. It's not even the same ballpark. Handguns are limited in effectiveness anyway. You have one because that's what you have on you, not because it's a great fighting tool. Nobody sends their frontline infantry into battle with handguns against people with rifles. They just don't, right? Because they're not as good. Handguns are also the hardest gun to master. One of the reasons I love them so much, because I like the challenge. But handguns are hard to master. They're hard to shoot well. The smaller you make the handgun, almost always, unless there's some weird thing going on with you and a certain gun, the bigger full-size fighting handguns, they drive a lot smoother. They're a lot better. You can get faster, quicker, more accurate hits on target, which is kind of the point of carrying a gun, to get hits on target, not to look cool, not to show off at a barbecue, right? It's to get hits on target quickly. So I'm a big advocate of you carrying a full-size fighting handgun. I'm here to tell you that a lot of you, sadly, live in an urban environment and you're just not going to do it because you're worried about what people are going to think about you. You don't want to dress a certain way. You don't want to find a new job. You're just going to stand there and have your rights taken away. And carrying a small gun is certainly better than carrying no gun. So a lot of these little hashtag #MeToo guns, there's a place for those in the urban environment for the people that are just going to be trampled on and their rights. A Ruger LCP, little micro 380s, a little micro baby 9s. I'm not saying you should carry one of those, but I think a lot of people in an urban environment, it's those or nothing. And if it's those or nothing, those are better than nothing. So a lot of times, you're going to see those in an urban environment. You had better train more because you have a worse weapon. That's what I'm going to say. But just keep that in mind that in general, the smaller the handgun, the harder it is to shoot. Just physics. It's settled science. I think caliber is about a wash, right? You might think if you live in the country you need bigger calibers. I don't necessarily think that's the case. Again, maybe ruffle some feathers there, but for every case you could make for a higher caliber in one environment, you could make for in another. For instance, 308 is way better for hunting deer and stopping, big aggressive animals and things like that. It's also better for stopping engine blocks. There's a lot of times when I did urban operations where I would choose a 308 over a 5.56. And my primary threat, if I've got intel that we might have a vehicle ramming, I want the 308. You know, an 800-pound charging bear is really nasty, but so also is a vehicle that weighs several thousand pounds plowing through a crowd of people. So you could say, oh, 10 millimeter in the country. But, I mean, 10 millimeter also going to do a good job penetrating car doors. Right? If you're relegated to only having a handgun, and let's say you do have to carry one of those little hashtag Me Too guns in your pocket, maybe having a handgun in your vehicle that's locked that you can access if there's mobs or rioting or something on your way home, that's going to be better at shooting in and out of vehicles. So, again, I don't think the caliber thing makes a lot of sense one way or the other. You're still going to give up on both ends. You're still going to give up shootability. You're still going to give up shot to shot recovery time. So, I don't think it's unique. I don't think there's an argument to be made for one caliber over another until you get to the ridiculous. Like if you're going to carry a bolt action rifle as your truck gun, yeah, it probably makes more sense if you live in a very rural environment to carry a 375 H&H. I could see almost no case for that in say Manhattan. Well, you probably can't even carry a gun in your truck in Manhattan. In Atlanta, Georgia, right? You probably don't need a 375 H&H. That's in an urban environment. No matter how many people listen to country music, a 223 is probably better in a bolt gun. You could make the argument for a 308, but you probably can't make the argument for a 300 Win Mag or a 375 H&H. Where as an area I like to hunt and frequent, the bitter roots, you could make a very good case for those. Although I generally don't. I generally 30-06 is fine. So until you get up to the really big, I don't think there's a real difference in caliber selection. So those are some thoughts. I could probably ramble on about some other stuff, but I think we've gone on long enough. I think you guys get the idea. Stop listening to whatever the hot trends are and do a deep dive analysis on you and your life and your environment and see what is going to work best for you. What's the most logical choice for you in your environment? And here's what I'm going to tell you. Be good in both. Be well-rounded in both. You're probably going to prefer one to another. Yeah, I would much prefer building a fire out in the wilderness hunting with my Rhodesian Ridgebacks than I would being in a city. But guess what? If my wife wants me to put on, a nice outfit and go do something in the city with her, I'll do it. If there's a private security contract going down in the city and, there's potential for people to get hurt in the city, I will go spend time in the city. You should be able to be well regulated and well versed in both environments because we live in an increasingly urban world. And unless you just never have to go to a city, you're probably going to have to find yourself in a city from time to time. Even if you're a rancher and you go to Costco once every 2 weeks, that's still in the city. So I think the best approach is to be well-rounded in both environments. And for that, your tactical verse of the day, Deuteronomy 28. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the country. My thoughts. Whether you're in the city or the country, there's one God. He's just as much God in the city as in the country. He's just as much your protector in the city as in the country. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the country. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.